The tragedy and the farce, why history keeps repeating itself. They say history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. But what if, in our time, both coexist? We live in an age where tragedy and farce dance together. The tragedy of the working class defending its own oppressors. And the farce of a political circus designed to hide who really holds power. How did we get here? How does exploitation manage to disguise itself as justice? How does oppression wear the mask of freedom? To understand it, we must return to Karl Marx. And to one of his most misunderstood ideas, ideology. What is ideology, really? It's not just a set of lies imposed from above. Ideology is not a story told by the powerful. It's a lived experience, born from the very structure of society itself. It arises from the way people produce and reproduce their lives. In capitalism, humans enter into relationships that seem natural, inevitable. But are, in truth, historical and constructed. The worker must sell their labor power to survive. The capitalist must exploit that labor to expand their capital. It's a contract written in necessity, not in freedom. Yet these relations are presented as normal, even moral. This is ideology at work. The transformation of exploitation into common sense. The invisible mechanism. The worker doesn't see that their labor creates more value than they are paid for. They don't see that their poverty sustains someone else's wealth. They're told it's their fault, that they didn't work hard enough. That they made bad choices, that they need to hustle harder. And so, capitalism doesn't just exploit the worker. It teaches them to blame themselves for being exploited. That's the genius of ideology. You don't need chains when people carry their own. Marx described this with mathematical precision. But it's also a psychological truth. In the age of social media, the invisible hand of the market is joined by the invisible hand of comparison, envy, and guilt. The worker no longer just produces commodities. They become one. Crisis and control. But capitalism is not stable. It moves from crisis to crisis. Each one revealing its contradictions. Too much wealth in too few hands. Too much misery among those who produce it. And every time the system trembles, it needs new tools to survive. Not only must the exploited accept their condition, they must defend it. This is when the ruling class brings out its two great weapons. Coercion and consent. Coercion is the open fist. The police, the army, the prisons. The visible machinery of repression. But consent, that's the masterpiece. That's when the oppressed not only obey, but believe in the necessity of their own subjugation. That's when domination becomes invisible. When the cage looks like freedom. From Marx to Gramsci. When Marx wrote the German ideology, he was already pointing to this invisible structure. How the material conditions of production shape the forms of consciousness itself. Decades later, Antonio Gramsci, writing from a fascist prison, took Marx's insight further. He called it hegemony. The process by which the ruling class doesn't just control the economy, but also controls how we think, feel, and dream. The greatest power of capitalism isn't military. It's emotional. It colonizes our imagination. It tells us not only how to live, but what to desire. It whispers, "You're free." And we believe it, even as we work ourselves to exhaustion. Even as we compete against each other for crumbs. The new tragedy. This is the true tragedy of our time. The oppressed no longer rebel. They vote for their oppressors. They cheer for their own chains. They defend billionaires who wouldn't look at them twice. They confuse exploitation with opportunity. And obedience with virtue. They repost slogans about freedom, while living lives owned by debt, rent, and endless work. And the farce? It's the political theater that distracts us from all of this. A media spectacle of outrage, celebrity, and false debate. The right screams socialism. The left tweets resistance. And meanwhile, the same corporations fund both. Marx would recognize the pattern instantly. A system that renews itself through chaos. A capitalism so sophisticated. It sells rebellion as a brand. In the age of advanced capitalism, power no longer rules only through violence. It rules through consent, carefully manufactured, subtly maintained, invisibly imposed. How does this happen? How do entire societies come to defend the very systems that exploit them? To understand that, we must turn to a thinker who built upon Marx's legacy, Georgy Lukács. The philosopher who revealed one of capitalism's darkest mechanisms, reification. The world turned into things. Lukács showed how, under capitalism, the commodity form doesn't just shape the economy. It invades the entire fabric of social life. We no longer only buy and sell goods. We buy and sell ourselves. Our relationships, our time, our creativity, even our emotions. All become commodities, measurable and tradable. Marx described how, in capitalist production, social relations between people begin to appear as relations between things. Lukács took this further. He showed that our consciousness itself becomes a commodity. Today, in the digital age, this process has reached its purest form. Digital reification. Scroll through your phone. Your friendships are now contacts. Your thoughts are content. Your emotions are data. Every gesture, every moment, every word becomes quantifiable. Likes, shares, metrics, engagement. Your very identity is algorithmic. The you that exists online is a brand, carefully curated, optimized, marketed. We no longer live our lives, we perform them. This is not just alienation, it's commodified alienation. Our subjectivity has been captured, formatted, and sold back to us in high definition. Even our rebellion, our sarcasm, our dissatisfaction are turned into content. Profitable for someone else. The digital world didn't end capitalism's exploitation. It made it intimate. The new factory of the mind. The 21st century factory is not made of bricks and machines. It's made of data and dopamine. It doesn't produce goods, it produces consent. Every meme, every newsfeed, every recommendation algorithm works toward one goal, to transform potential rebellion into passive participation. You don't need police if people voluntarily stay glued to screens. You don't need censorship if attention itself becomes the prison. And so, in moments of crisis, when capitalism trembles, the system doesn't just respond with guns or propaganda. It responds with narratives. It tells us who to blame, what to fear, and where to look. Never upward, always sideways or downward. The perfect lesson. Remember 2008. The financial collapse began in the U.S. mortgage markets. A crisis of speculation and greed. Banks gambled. The system imploded. Millions lost their jobs, their homes, their savings. And yet, the same banks responsible for the disaster were rescued with public money. The guilty were rewarded. The victims were punished. It was the perfect Marxist tragedy. Private profit, public loss. Capitalism devouring itself, and being resurrected by the state. Workers paid for the crimes of the capitalists through austerity, wage cuts, and unemployment. And when despair spread, when the legitimacy of the system began to fracture, a new force emerged, not revolution, but reaction. The rise of neo-fascism. Instead of dismantling the system that caused the crisis, the ruling class found a more convenient solution. Redirect the anger. Enter the new faces of neo-fascism. Donald Trump in the United States. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Marine Le Pen in France. All of them promised change. All of them claimed to speak for the people. But their real mission was simple. To protect the old order by inventing new enemies. Immigrants. Minorities. Women. The left. Anyone, except the actual architects of misery. And so the anger of the exploited was turned against itself. The victims of capitalism began defending the ideology of capital. The poor began idolizing billionaires. Workers began blaming other workers. This is the masterpiece of modern hegemony. To make the oppressed fight each other, while the oppressors watch from above. Calm, silent, smiling. The cycle of manufactured fear. The system feeds on crises, but it also needs them. Every collapse is an opportunity to rebuild legitimacy. Every outrage is monetized. Every fear is weaponized. The media, the politicians, the corporations. They all work in chorus. They sell you freedom while watching your every move. They offer democracy while funding the same candidates. They manufacture outrage while muting the truth. And the people? They scroll, react, and believe they're choosing. While every choice has already been predicted. Monetized. And sold. Marx's voice in the noise. If Marx were alive today, he wouldn't be surprised. He'd simply update his analysis. The ruling ideas of every age are the ideas of the ruling class. Today, those ideas come wrapped in hashtags and algorithms. The new religion is not faith in God. It's faith in visibility. To exist, you must be seen. To matter, you must perform. And so, even dissent is simulated. Even rebellion is monetized. The system survives not by silencing opposition, but by absorbing it. Every system, when it begins to crumble, produces its own defense mechanism. For capitalism, that mechanism has a name, fascism. And in our time, reshaped, digitized, and disguised, it's called neo-fascism. When the mask cracks, fascism doesn't emerge from strength. It emerges from weakness, from a ruling order that can no longer convince the people to believe in it. When economic crisis becomes social crisis. When millions lose jobs, homes, and dignity. The old common sense that held society together begins to disintegrate. This is what Marx called a crisis of hegemony. When the ideology that justified the system stops making sense. And people begin to see the contradictions naked before them. Workers realize that hard work doesn't lead to stability. Families realize that freedom without equality is just a slogan. The people begin to doubt, and that's when the danger begins. Because when faith in the system collapses, the ruling class must rebuild it. Not through truth, but through fear. The perfect storm. In moments of deep crisis, capitalism faces a choice. Transform itself, or enforce obedience. History shows which path it always takes. In the 1930s, economic collapse opened the door to fascism. The Great Depression shattered illusions of endless progress. And into that void stepped men like Hitler and Mussolini, who promised stability, order, and national pride. But what did they actually defend? Not the people, but property. Not justice, but profit. Their mission was clear, to save capitalism from itself. By destroying every force that could challenge it, unions, communists, socialists, and free thinkers. Today, the pattern repeats. The methods have changed, but the logic remains. The new fascism doesn't need brown shirts or marching crowds. It has algorithms. It doesn't burn books, it buries truth under waves of misinformation. Welcome to the Digital Reich. Neo-fascism and the digital age. In the 21st century, fascism no longer wears uniforms. It wears suits. It tweets. It streams. The rallies are now virtual. The propaganda, personalized, targeted, and optimized. While the fascists of the past needed microphones and crowds. Today's demagogues need only a smartphone and a marketing team. They don't shout from balconies. They whisper from your feed. The neo-fascist algorithm doesn't command, it suggests. It doesn't force you to believe, it guides your beliefs until you think they were yours all along. This is the evolution of power Gramsci foresaw. Not domination by force, but domination by consent. And when consent begins to fracture, fear fills the void. Manufactured enemies. Every fascist needs an enemy. Someone to blame, someone to hate, someone to fear. In the 1930s, Hitler pointed to the Jews and the communists. Today, the neo-fascists point to immigrants, women, LGBTQ people, the poor, or the global south. The names change. The logic doesn't. Racism remains the bloodstream of fascism. But now it's injected with a cultural anesthetic. They no longer say, they're inferior. Now they say, they just don't share our values. They talk about defending Western civilization, protecting traditional culture, preserving national identity. But beneath the polite language hides the same poison. It's racism with better manners. Hatred dressed as heritage. Domination disguised as cultural concern. The double face of modern fascism. Neo-fascism learned to play a double game. To its radical base, it speaks the language of rage. Open racism, xenophobia, violence, conspiracy. To the middle classes, it wears a mask of respectability. Talking about freedom of speech, law and order, and cultural values. It's the same ideology, coded for different audiences. Online, this duplicity thrives. The same politician who gives a hateful speech on an obscure platform appears the next day on national television smiling, calm, reasonable. This double discourse allows neo-fascism to expand its reach. Radicalizing one hand, reassuring the other. The role of crisis. Every resurgence of fascism begins with economic collapse. When capitalism fails to deliver prosperity, it needs a scapegoat. In 2008, it was the financial system. In 2016, it was globalization. Now, it's migrants, feminism, environmentalism, anything that challenges power. Neo-fascism is capitalism's immune system. It activates whenever the body of the system feels threatened. Its goal isn't to destroy capitalism, it's to save it from revolution. By dividing the poor. By distracting the working class. By replacing solidarity with suspicion. It's the ultimate defense mechanism. A vaccine against class consciousness. The cultural battlefield. This new fascism doesn't seek totalitarian control through armies. It seeks control through culture. The battlefield is no longer the street. It's the mind. The weapons are no longer bullets. They're ideas. Every movie, every meme, every political slogan is part of the new propaganda machine. It teaches us who to love, who to fear, what to desire. It convinces us that consumerism is freedom, and apathy is safety. And while we argue online about identity, the owners of the world count their profits in silence. Marx warned us. History repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. The first tragedy was fascism. The farce is thinking it could never return. But it has. Not in the same uniforms, not with the same banners. But with the same purpose. To keep the machinery of capital intact. No matter how many lives it crushes in the process. And as long as we confuse freedom with consumption. And power with popularity. The door to neo-fascism will remain wide open. Fascism is not the opposite of capitalism. It's what capitalism becomes when it's afraid. And today, capitalism is terrified. Of its own contradictions. Of the awakening of the exploited. Of the moment when the consensus finally breaks. The question is no longer whether fascism can rise again. It already has. The question is, will we recognize it? before it recognizes us. Every empire learns to evolve. Fascism is no exception. In the 1930s, it didn't begin as an army, it began as a story. A story about who was to blame. A story about who didn't belong. A story that transformed despair into obedience. Germany's fascists didn't invent hate, they organized it. They took the real pain of a collapsing economy, the real humiliation of millions of workers, and pointed it at the wrong target. Not at the bankers or the factory owners, but at the Jews. Not at the capitalists, but at the communists. Fascism turned class anger into racial hatred. A masterpiece of misdirection. It's how the victims of capitalism were convinced to fight for it. The reincarnation of control. Fast forward to the 21st century. The methods have changed, the mission hasn't. The new fascism doesn't need rallies in the streets. It doesn't need a single dictator shouting from a balcony. It has something far more efficient, the algorithm. In the age of data, the control of the masses no longer requires censorship. It only requires noise. We don't need a ministry of truth when truth itself is drowned in a sea of content. Distraction has replaced dictatorship. And the result is far more stable. Because the perfect form of control is the one you don't recognize as control. The digital Reich. If the 20th century's fascism conquered through fear, the 21st conquers through information. Our desires are mapped. Our emotions tracked. Our anger categorized, predicted, and fed back to us. In doses calculated to keep us obedient. And divided. What once required secret police now requires analytics. What once used propaganda now uses personalized feeds. Every scroll, every like, every share is a data point. A pulse of the social body. And behind every pulse, there's a market. Behind every market, a political agenda. This is the new machinery of consent. A system that doesn't silence you. It talks louder than you until you fall silent yourself. The engine of manufactured hate. The same way Hitler's speeches created scapegoats. Today's algorithms amplify outrage. The logic is simple. Outrage generates engagement. Engagement generates data. Data generates profit. And so, hatred becomes monetized. Every argument, every insult, every viral lie feeds the servers of Silicon Valley. And the power of those who own them. Neo-fascism doesn't need to brainwash the population. It simply gives them mirrors that reflect their fears. And sells ads in between. The invisible hand of the machine. In this digital world, ideology has become invisible. It's not delivered by propaganda posters or military parades. But by personalized feeds and recommendation algorithms. Your worldview isn't shaped by study or reflection. But by what keeps you scrolling. The result is a global society where truth competes, and loses, against entertainment. Where critical thinking is replaced by reaction. Where every citizen becomes both consumer and product. It's not fascism reborn through violence. It's fascism reborn through design. Marx wrote about ideology as the mask of material relations. A veil hiding the real mechanisms of exploitation. If he lived today, he wouldn't find that mask in newspapers or parliaments. He'd find it in the algorithmic fabric of social media. Where reality itself is filtered through the needs of capital. He'd say, the ruling ideas are still the ideas of the ruling class. But now they're trending on your feed. Closing reflection. The neo-fascism of our time doesn't march. It scrolls. It doesn't burn books. It buries truth under infinite updates. It doesn't shout slogans. It whispers personalized ads. It tells us we're free, while it tracks every step we take. It convinces us we're individuals, while turning us into data. And so, the tragedy of history repeats. Not in the streets of Berlin, but in the silence of our screens.